let me introduce you to my DIY snowmobile camper. I built it last year with my dad, and I've taken it on several trips since then. This year, I doubled the insulation, and I'm currently prepping to take it on its first tour this winter. After making provisions for my fair-feathered friends, I could now see to my own. I've been looking forward to this trip because I will finally get to field test a heating system which I've developed for the camper. The weather report says it's going to be a cold one tonight, so here's hoping my homemade water heater will keep me warm enough. With the loaded camper in tow, I was underway. Through snowy glade and along forest trail I went. It was a day of mixed weather, overcast in the morning and snowy in the afternoon, with the odd patch of sun. As the afternoon grew later and the journey extended further, the trees together drew closer and my pace noticeably lesser. It was as I traced between the closely knit cedars that I decided it was best to stop for the night. I didn't want to find myself at the end of a trail with no easy way to turn around. I began to look for a small clearing that I could camp in. Well, it wasn't much of an opening, but it will have to do for the night. On the upside, the dense tree cover will provide excellent shelter from the wind. It was time to settle in. After establishing the fire, my next job was to get the heater going. I filled the ammo can with a 50-50 mixture of environmentally friendly antifreeze and water, totaling about 30 liters of liquid. To keep it from being knocked over in the night, I made sure to anchor the ammo can to the wall. Next was the copper coil, which I had placed inside this lobster pot filled with sand. Finally, I hooked the outside coil up to the ammo box inside the camper, using 2 hot water lines which I fed through a port in the camper floor. I added pool noodles to the exposed water lines to insulate them from the cold and minimize their heat loss. After placing the coil on the fire, I noted that it took an hour for the water to begin circulating. Since I've already spoken about this system in another episode, which I've linked in the description, I will give just a summary of how it works here. Basically, the water in the ammo can travels down into the coil where it's heated in the fire. The heated water then circulates back into the ammo can. As the water continues to circulate and heat up, the ammo can then radiates that heat into the camper. Once the fire goes out, the sand in the lobster pot and the water in the ammo can will act as thermal batteries, radiating their heat into the camper until it eventually dissipates. The hope is that the ammo can will absorb enough thermal energy from the fire to keep the camper warm until morning. That's the hope, at least. Once hooked up, I made sure that all 3 of the tank's valves were fully opened. The lower valve on the side is where cooler water flows out to the coil. The upper valve on the same side is where heated water from the coil circulates back into the ammo can. And finally, the valve at the very top acts as a vent. This vent is extremely important because it prevents pressure from building up in the system. It is also directed outside with a hose to prevent the camper from filling up with moisture. Anyway, that's basically how the whole thing works. After the system had taken several hours to sufficiently store the campfire's thermal energy, the camper temperature had risen to a toasty 21 degrees Celsius and rising, while outside it was minus 11 degrees and falling. The camper would eventually reach a peak temperature of 24 degrees Celsius or 75 degrees Fahrenheit, even though I had left the door wide open several times throughout the evening. I noticed that there seemed to be a fair amount of steam escaping from the vent hose. This concerned me because I didn't want to lose too much water and therefore the camper's warmth to evaporation. However, when I checked the water level in the tank the next day, I saw that there had hardly been any loss at all. Once it seemed that the water in the ammo can was about to boil, I removed the coil from the fire and allowed the system to coast for a little bit. The good news is that the water continued to circulate anyway, but no longer at a runaway pace. I decided to go on a short walk to stretch my legs one last time before going to bed. I've never gone a night out here without hearing at least one howl, and often many more. But tonight, the forest was unusually silent. Were they sleeping, or were they watching? The temperature was continuing to fall and would reach minus 18 degrees Celsius or 0 degrees Fahrenheit by the wee hours of the morning. So I figured the coyotes had tucked themselves away in their warm dens, and I would be wise to do the same. When the fire had died down, I set the coil back onto the coals, which is where I left it for the night. In order to keep the heat inside the camper, I would not be opening the door again until morning. Once inside, I could finally sit down to eat one of my trademark no-cook suppers. Smoked salmon, pepperettes, fruit, macaroni salad, and some trail mix. It isn't fancy, but it's practical.
So as you can see, I'm settled in for the night. And although it's a typical winter's night outside at minus 12 degrees Celsius, inside it's a cozy 22 degrees Celsius What I did before I came in was I let the fire die down just to the coals, and I have the lobster pot or the copper coil sitting on those coals right now. So as the night continues, that heat will slowly dissipate. But for now, those coals are just keeping the system warmer for a little bit longer. Hopefully, I can make it mostly to the morning with this place being nice and warm. I also have an electric 12-volt blanket inside my sleeping bag, so that's keeping me warm if it gets cold in here. So I'm really curious to see how the heat will dissipate, if it will happen quickly or slowly over the course of the night. I'm just not sure, so I'll have to check back in with you in the morning on that. But the good thing is that this whole thing is insulated quite nicely. So the floor is insulated, the walls and the ceiling is also insulated. I have 2 inches of insulation on the walls, and above me I have an inch of insulation, foam board insulation, followed by 2 inches of space, which is where the roof rafters run. And then underneath that, there's an 1.5 inches of foam board insulation, followed by this cedar lumber here. So I think with the combination of having a couple sheets of foam board insulation above me and having some air between them, I think it'll make this roof really good for holding the heat that much longer. For how long, I don't know. So again, I'll have to check back in with you in the morning on that one. If you've been following along with my channel, you'll know that I've been developing this ammo can heater, or this copper coil heater, for several episodes now. In the summertime, I came up with a concept design and I was pleased with the results, but I also knew that there was some room for improvement. So through some research of my own and just some observations that I had made, I began to refine the system. At the same time, I had received so many comments from the outsider community, so many great ideas and suggestions to help refine the system further, just from different people all over the world, different walks of life, different skill sets and expertise. It was just really great hearing from all of you. So I've taken some of these suggestions and I've implemented them to just make a better system. I received several comments from people suggesting that I use pool noodles to insulate the water lines, and they are no doubt helping to improve the efficiency of the system because there isn't as much heat loss as they travel between the fire and the camper. I had also received so many suggestions from people saying that I should use antifreeze in the system. And initially, I just didn't want to use antifreeze because all the antifreeze that I've known is bad for the environment. So if I were to accidentally spill, it would be bad for the animals and for the plant life in the area. But as I read further through the suggestions, there were people saying that there's actually an environmentally friendly antifreeze that you can buy, and it's called RV antifreeze. So having the RV antifreeze mixed in with everything just gives me that peace of mind knowing that these lines aren't going to freeze up on me. So that's been a great suggestion that I've really appreciated. So I say all that to say a big thank you to the outsider community. I have really appreciated your suggestions, and really you've helped me refine the system. So this is as much your project as it is mine. So thank you so much. So here's a look at the foot of the bed. I've got everything packed in. On the right side, I have my drone bag, which it has to stay inside here so that the batteries don't freeze. The same thing with my camera bag, has my camcorder and GoPro. Over here, I have a power bank, which is running the electric blanket in my sleeping bag. And of course, the ammo can heater. It's really nice that it's at the foot of my bed so that I can put my feet up against it, and it keeps me nice and warm. So I can actually stretch out in here, but there's no more extra room. As well, I have my vintage LED cage lights, whatever you call them. The funny thing is that whenever I have an episode where these lights are shown, I always get people asking me where I got them from. So in this episode, in the video description, I've linked them. So if you want to know where I got these lights from, you can just click on the link and that'll be your answer. So yeah, I think I'm ready to turn for the night, and I'll see you in the morning.
Once I had left the coil on the coals and gone inside for the night, the ammo box continued to steadily gurgle away for another hour. After that, the circulation slowed to a gentler pace. Just as it had taken the system 4 hours to reach peak circulation, it took the same amount of time for the circulation to stop after the fire had died down. Then the system coasted on whatever thermal energy it was able to store, which lasted me pretty much until the morning.
Well, good morning. It's 8 a.m. and I'm just nicely getting up. As I look at the indoor-outdoor thermometer, it's minus 17 degrees Celsius outside and it's plus 13 degrees Celsius inside. So that's a 30-degree difference. It's still fairly warm in here, especially considering how cold it is outside this morning. Now in Fahrenheit, outside it's right around 0 degrees, maybe 1 degree or something like that. And inside it's 55 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's pretty much a 55-degree difference in Fahrenheit. So obviously the ammo box heater has been doing its job quite well. Now, of course, this place would be warmed a little bit by my own body heat. And I have had the electric blanket running throughout the night, but it is a 12-volt blanket, so it's not putting out a lot of heat, just a little bit inside my sleeping bag. So I'm not sure how much that's producing, but as I feel the ammo box heater, it's a little bit warm to the touch, just slightly above room temperature. When I turned in for the night, the ammo box was too hot to touch. The water was still quite hot. It was circulating well, and I could hear it circulating for about an hour to 2 hours after I came in. So the lobster pot in the sand, which is holding the coil, did a good job at retaining that heat and continuing to circulate even once the fire had died down to coals. Now I'm guessing that although I stopped hearing it circulate an hour or two after I came in, I think it was still circulating a little bit. It just was circulating so slowly that I really couldn't hear it happening in the tank. Last time I stayed in the snowmobile camper, I boiled some water outside on the campfire, and I filled up 2 military canteens, and I put them in here, and they stayed hot for, I would say, 3 to 4 hours until they lost pretty much all of their heat, and by morning there wasn't any heat left in them. So that leads me to believe that there must have been just a little bit of circulation throughout the night, maybe even into the morning as it's sitting on some of those coals. As far as my overall thoughts about the ammo box heater are concerned, I would say that this is obviously a system that works. It could use some refinement. It does need some babysitting. For example, if I had just left this ammo box in the roaring fire, it would probably begin to boil, which isn't a great thing. Everything's sealed up, but I wouldn't want to push the seals past their limits, and the boiling point would do that. So I wouldn't trust the system to leave it in the fire and go to bed like that, just because it just might begin to heat out of control. So that's why I left it on the coals, although it would have been nicer to have a little bit of a fire burning with it, but I just don't want to go back out and tend the fire. Once I close this door, I'm in for the night, because I don't want to open this again and let all of that hard-earned heat out of here. The downside of this ammo box heater is that it's really, really clunky, but it works. So I would say this is a great system in an off-grid application, but I would prefer to leave it hooked up. But since I'll be packing up the camper this morning and heading out, that means I'm going to have to break the system back down again and get it all packed up, which is a bit of a pain. So if I were staying here multiple nights or for an extended period of time, this system would make a lot more sense. But overall, I'm happy with how effective it seems to be. I'm quite warm in here, even though it's fairly cold outside this morning. Anyway, I'm gonna get my stuff together now and head out.
When I was able to check the water lines in the morning, I noticed that the liquid inside had turned to slush. I guess that's what I get for using a half mixture. I was just happy that I didn't use straight water after all, because if I did, the lines would no doubt have frozen solid, likely cracking the coil and rendering my system useless. As I rejoined the trail that morning, my head was already filled with new improvements and designs for my little snowmobile camper, which means that more of these episodes are on the way. Until next time, my friends. When it came to this journey, I think I covered almost as many miles on foot as I did on the sled.